Okay, great. So here we are, the last talk in this series, Building the Buddha Land. And next week, as we've heard, Mitra ceremonies. And after that, we start a new series. And in fact, some new people fresh from their intermediate course will be joining us that week as well. The series is about building the Buddha land. Last week, Vidania, you gave a really great talk about the practice of doing ritual, meaningful ritual together. And you called it inviting the enlightened mind. So it was a talk about how by doing ritual together, the sevenfold puja in particular together, we can open up and invite the Buddha, as it were, into our house. And what we do in the ritual is we prepare ourselves to invite him in, and the other Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and to invite in the enlightened mind into our experience. And ideally, so our plan A had been that tonight we would have had an amazing big sevenfold puja. So that talk would have worked really well because we'd have then had a puja this week. And but because in the hall we all need to still be wearing masks and chanting isn't really allowed unless you do it really quietly, we just thought it's not going to be the same. It's not going to be the same as doing a big Sangha sevenfold puja. We'll leave that until we can actually be in the hall together, most of us together. So instead, I'm going to finish the series with a closing talk. And what it is it really just brings together some threads of my own personal experience of being involved in building the Buddha land. And hopefully it also maybe ties the talks together. So you could call it How I Learned to Love the Sangha. In fact, so much that I decided that I put all my energies into be part of creating a Buddha land. And I work full-time at the centre, currently in the role of chair. And what that means is I take the responsibility to steer the Sheffield Buddhist Centre and work with everybody here, with all of you, so that together we can create a Buddha land here in Sheffield. So what is a Buddha land? Well, a Buddha land is a place where individuals can grow and support each other to grow towards enlightenment, towards liberation, the liberation of all living beings. And so it is made up of the Sangha. You know, there's no enlightenment outside people. There's no Buddha outside the body. We are that Sangha, that community of people practicing the Dharma. And we can see it mythically as the figure of Avalokiteshvara. We've had a few talks on Avalokiteshvara. And I think there's going to be a picture amazingly appearing. Yeah, so here's a figure of Avalokiteshvara, this bodhisattva, the symbolic figure that represents the bodhisattva who builds the Buddha land. And you probably can't see, maybe you can, but each of the hands of the bodhisattva has an eye, so that you can see, each hand can see the suffering of the world, and each hand carries a particular tool that can do something to alleviate the suffering of the world. And each of us, the myth we can see ourselves is we're each one of those hands of Avalokiteshvara. But as well as being a hand active in alleviating suffering, the center of the picture where Avalokiteshvara holds the Chintamani. So this is, you can see that he holds to his heart center a jewel. The Chintamani means wish fulfilling jewel. And the wish fulfilling jewel is the wish to enlightenment for all beings. It's the bodhicitta. So it's the awakening in us of going beyond ourselves and wishing not just liberation for us, but seeing that we're so connected, we're so interrelated with all other beings that it's impossible to talk about liberation just for us or for others. The whole thing works together. So having contact with this Chintamani, even the wish for liberation for all beings, even if it's a small glimmer in our being, we need that. Or actually, we're not a spiritual community. We might all have a tool of Avalokiteshvara, and we might all be doing great things. But to be a spiritual community, it needs to be coming from this place of the wish for enlightenment for all beings, the wish for more than just our own happiness. So a Buddha land is not about developing a really well-run organization. It's not about just having a lovely building and the beautiful gardens. What it is about jointly creating the conditions for the growth, the liberation for all of us and for all beings. So when I was young, I did have some awareness of suffering in the world. I think I was quite concerned about it, actually. And I remember I had a really strong wish to make people happier, or to be part of, do what I could to help people be happier. And I remember that when I was thinking about what I might do when I left school, I thought, okay, I'll study psychology because that will tell me what people need to be happy. And then when I know what they need to be happy, I can do something about it. So sadly at that time, that wasn't on the curriculum, though I think it probably is now, actually. I think this whole kind of growth of positive psychology, looking at what people need to be happy. But that wasn't something that I looked at in my course. And I was also interested in politics. I saw maybe political movements as a way of alleviating suffering. So I was involved particularly in women's politics, environmental politics, and various other groups as well. And but interestingly, we didn't always get along that well in those groups. There was a lot of emotional and personal conflicts that played out in the groups, people falling in love with each other, falling out of love with each other, people disagreeing with each other, not being able to hold the conflict, so much going on. And I remember thinking that actually, I don't think the world would be that much better if me and my colleagues had political power. If suddenly we were put in charge, I didn't think actually it was going to be that much better. And also for me, my work was an important part of my life. So what I did is I worked doing kind of community media, which means making opportunities for people to have access to making media productions. And I saw that very much about as giving people a voice, people whose stories weren't heard, giving them a voice. And I managed to find kind of enjoyable and well-paid work. And I felt like I was making a general contribution to the well-being of the world. But kind of none of it felt like it was quite enough. Anyway, then because I started a new job doing that kind of work, director of a little organisation. In fact, Andy interviewed me for that very job. So it's all his fault. Anyway, I went for that job in Birmingham and got the role of director. And it was all a bit dysfunctional there. And I got really stressed. And I started to thought, what I need to do is learn to meditate. That's what people do when they're stressed. So I went along to some Buddhist groups, tried out a few actually, and settled for a while in a Tibetan group. And actually meditation was pretty hard for me because the state of my consciousness was not brilliant, very stressed, but I loved the Dharma. I was just blown away by the Dharma, actually. It just made such sense to me. It was just so exciting for me to come across this real kind of, analysis going back 2,500 years of the human condition, this real articulation of what I tried to kind of fumble about in the dark, what I'd been looking for, but I could never articulate it. The Dharma just made such sense to me. It made such sense to me here that we're actually driven unconsciously by the three poisons of neurotic craving, aversion or hatred, and ignorance of how things really are. The middle of the wheel of life that we just chase ourselves round and round. It really made sense to me when I realized that we crave happiness, but we go about looking for happiness in a way that leads to more suffering. We're thirsty, but we just keep drinking more salt water. And of course, then we're more thirsty. And it really resonated with my experience that our minds create our experience and that we can work with the law of karma by acting ethically, which changes our minds and therefore changes our experience. We can be in the gap sometimes, and we can sometimes make creative decisions that will allow a whole new way of being a positive for us, positive for other people. So I felt that this question I'd had, which is, what makes people happy, what can be done about suffering, was really answered by the Dharma I was hearing and reading about. And I really saw the importance of the Dharma. In fact, I saw that the world is thirsty for the Dharma, actually. People really badly need the Dharma. If the more of us that live ethically, for instance, what a massive change that could be in the world. And many people are desperately unhappy because they're looking for meaning, they're looking for an understanding of the world, and they haven't come across the Dharma. So the world really needs the Dharma. So this very strong connection with what we call the Dharma Jewel. So there are three jewels in Buddhism. The Buddha, the Dharma, his teaching, and the Sangha, his community. And what we do as we deepen our practice is we gradually turn more and more towards those three jewels. We go for refuge to those three jewels. We make those the center of our life, the touchstones of our lives. So strong connection with the Dharma Jewel. But the Buddha Jewel, well, it took a while because I was a bit suspicious about the rituals and the chanting, the bowing, the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas because of my conditioning, which is interesting because actually I had kind of classic, scientific materialist kind of only what you can measure exists kind of conditioning. But I also had a really strong religious sense as a child and teenager, sometimes in nature, sometimes in music, Once so much that I went along to this youth club where a Christian band was playing, and they played some kind of a cover of a song. And I was so moved by it, they said, come and pray with us backstage. So I went and prayed with them backstage. It was great. And then for a while was part of a Christian youth club, which was actually quite a lot of fun. But after a while, I just couldn't put together the fact that there's a God who could intervene, and there's all this suffering, and there's kind of all sorts of complicated Christian reasons why the God doesn't intervene. But for me, it just doesn't work. And I think what I did is I just threw out the baby with the bathwater, because I didn't want to have God. And I became quite suspicious, actually, of those feelings in me of devotion, of reverence to something higher, something awesome, that part of me that did feel that reverence. But gradually, I think as I started doing more ritual, more meditation, that did change. And I developed a gratitude, respect and love for the Buddha. The Buddha, both the historical figure in the Pali Canon and something more archetypal about the Buddha, the spirit of enlightenment reaching through space and time. So reaching from India 2,500 years ago, but reaching out to me now. So in puja, in meditation, something intangible, a kind of atmosphere that I could be most in touch with on retreat. So I was connecting with the Dharma and the Buddha. And by this time I had asked for ordination, and sometimes as part of the ordination training process, there's a group of people called a kula who meet and kind of talk about you and help you and give you advice. And I remember going to this kula, and they kind of went, can see you've got the Dharma, can see you've got a connection with the Buddha, and what about the Sangha? And I was like, yeah, what about the Sangha? And well, I really was quite, I really was connecting with the Dharma and the Buddha. And in fact, I could connect with the Arya Sangha. The Arya Sangha is the community of those enlightened beings, historical, who many of them on what's called the refuge tree. I could really kind of connect with them, but the actual people around me in the community, the Sangha, I wasn't quite so keen on in many ways. And I think a lot of that is from a conditioning that maybe many of us share. It's just I didn't want to join a group. I didn't want to have a kind of label. I didn't want to be part of a cult. And I felt also like some people in the Sangha are quite different from me, quite different political views. Just like maybe not people I'd necessarily have chosen as friends. Though when I say that now, I think most people that I know I would choose as a friend. So I'm not quite sure who I meant. But anyway, like a sense that I just didn't want to be part of this group of people. And also, why did I need them? I could turn up, listen to talks, do my study. That was all very nice. And also I could read books. And there's so many talks on free Buddhist audio. And nowadays, of course, there's just like huge amounts of teaching on YouTube and other places. It's just like there's so much out there. So why did I need this kind of messy, complicated, real people Sangha? I felt like, to use this terminology, I could have like a personal Buddha land of my own with my books and me kind of doing a little bit of study. But why did I need to do more than that? Well, as I realized over time, there were lots of reasons. I needed the Sangha, the Buddha land, where we can support each other to grow to liberation for many reasons. Firstly, who we mix with, who we spend time with, really has an effect on us and our lives, actually far more than I realized before it became apparent to me. And I've got a couple of quite frivolous examples, but they were quite strong to me, and it's from the time that I was training for ordination. So the first is, I went to Nepal, which was great. And before I went, I wanted to do a first aid course in kind of like what you did if someone in the mountains needed first aid. And I went to this place in Wales where loads of people do this course called the Mountain Leadership. So everybody else pretty much on the course was doing their mountain leadership. And I'd just come to do this first aid thing. And by the end of it, I was going, I think I need to do my mountain leadership. I really do. It's a huge thing to do your mountain leadership. Like, you have to spend years on it and do so much work on it. But I was like, yeah, because then I'll just be able to take the Sangha out on walks and it'll be great. And it was just like, all it was because around me, all the conversations were like, I need to do this to get my thing. And I didn't pass this and I'll pass this. I was really caught up in it. And that was just a weekend. So that really showed me how much I'm affected. And the other one about the same time is I went with my mum. So my family's from Australia originally, some of my family. And I went with my mum. She wanted to visit a lot of the friends she had when we were little. I was sort of up to the age of 4, was living there some of the time. So we spent a lot of time going to houses of my friends' children, so people my age. I've never been that into having a beautiful house, if you know what I mean. Like spending loads of money on furniture and stuff has not been my thing. But all these people were building these beautiful houses, you know, really lovely furniture, rebuilding them from scratch in the bush and all this kind of amazing stuff. And again, I was like going around going, oh, when I get back, I'm going to really sort my house out. I'm going to build this. I'm going to turn these rooms. I'm going to knock down the wall. It'll be amazing. Then I got home and I was like, do I really want to do that? Actually, I didn't want to do that. But because I've been spending time with that's what people were into, that's what I thought I wanted to do. So I'm sorry for the frivolous examples, but there is a kind of depth in there, I think. It was just how I saw it. So really, it's just like the more time I spend in a community of people who share the same values as me, particularly the same ethical principles, the more I will practice. So the more I spend time around the people who care about the same things as me, the more I'm going to do it. And life is short. You know, there's nothing wrong with doing mountain leadership at all. In fact, it's amazing if you can do it. There's nothing wrong with having a beautiful house. That's always lovely. But for me, they just weren't actually things that were, for me, particularly important. So that's one thing, as a community of people who just share a very, very human thing. We just need people who have the same values. I also needed people to bring out the best in me. So people who would reassure me, be enthusiastic, people who were friends to me, who I needed spiritual friendship, where people really saw my potential, actually. And in fact, quite often would see more in me than I could see in myself. That was a big gift for me. So, you know, that's a reassurance of people. And in a spiritual community, well, I need people to bring out the worst in me as well. So actually today I got in quite a bad temper. And because I was here at the centre, I kind of had a bit of a rant with a few people, and I could see just reflected right back actually in their eyes, that although they were very like, fine, I was having a rant, there was like a little bit like, what is going on here? And I could see that in a way that because I was with other people who are practicing in the same way and have the same wish to practice ethics and the same kind of standards, really, it was really reflected back in a way that if I was somewhere else and I'd had a rant like that, they might well have joined in. Do you know what I mean? Like in a normal workplace, someone would have gone, I know, isn't it awful? And given a few more examples. So, yeah, and actually, you know, it's kind of easy to always be very kind and lovely if you just turn up occasionally for something. But if you could do a study group every week, week in, week out, over years, it's not easy to do that. If you turn up and you're trying to work out how to get a whole load of people to decorate this hall, it's not easy to work it out. You know, we're trying to work out the tech, things like that, all these things that people do. Actually, it really brings us up against ourselves in a good way, because we just really see where we are. And yeah. And sometimes I feel, because I live in a community and I work at the centre, I can feel like all my stuff is just right out there. But anyway, sometimes I think, oh, I wish I could just go home and no one could see me. But no, I do think in the long run, there's something really lovely about the fact that, you know, I am reflected back. I also needed a place where I can talk about quite openly and talk about experiences of the beautiful, the awe-inspiring, the mysterious, the religious, that which is beyond words. The fact that this is a place where we can talk about that and share that, I find that something that's really important to me. In being part of the Sangha, I needed a place where I could experience generosity towards me. And actually, it took me a while to really realize how generous people were being, because I think I came, you know, before I came along to stuff at the centre or on retreat centres, I was quite used to going on workshops where people would lead the workshop and they'd get quite well paid, like several £100s a day or more, something for doing the workshop. And I kind of presumed that everybody who was leading the retreats or maybe running a workshop here was also getting that. And it took me a while to realise that they certainly weren't. And that everybody was doing all this generosity of leading these events completely, you know, for free. So, you know, I just took it for granted that they'd do it. You know, I'd be like, well, of course they're doing it. They're getting paid, but they weren't. So something about realizing the generosity of people. As well, a place to experience positivity, kindness, friendliness. Again, a little bit, me at first was like, well, what do these people want that they're being so friendly? This is a bit weird. So a little bit of having to get used to that, really. I needed a community where I could be generous as well. So where I could give. And actually where I could make a change from a kind of place of entitlement that I deserve to be given all this stuff to actually realizing, no, I can give too. And actually, if I want to make something happen, well, why don't I, with other people, make it happen? instead of thinking, oh, somebody else could make it happen for me, it's like I could actually be part of making something happening. So some reasons why being part of the Sangha, being part of this Buddha land was important to me. And of course, I want to recognize it's not always easy to be part of the Sangha, because we might have all sorts of experience and feelings about being in groups. We might have felt rejected before in groups, or we might feel superior and aloof in groups. We might feel a bit socially anxious, feel like an outsider. All of that can be really painful, actually. But we can overcome that, I think. I think we can overcome that with a friendliness that actually, even though Sangha is sometimes difficult, it is also a place to form those connections. I think another thing that people sometimes have is that experience of, at first, like everyone's really friendly. People go, wow, this is amazing. What a fantastic community. And then they start to realize that we aren't perfect and that things aren't always the way that, that somebody wants them to be. So I think there can be this kind of honeymoon period of like, this is amazing. And then a bit of like, oh, but actually these people do things that I don't like. They make mistakes. They get it wrong. They're not enlightened, actually. And that can be hard. And I think, in a way, maybe what we do is we come along and we kind of see all these lovely people and we think, oh, this might give me the happy family that I never had, or the happy family I always longed for. And there's something about realizing, no, that can't happen. The Sangha is not going to do that. Because that's one of the reasons why we need the vision of the bodhicitta, the liberation of all beings, at the heart of the Buddha land. It's because otherwise unconscious drives in us will be driving us to recreate a family or recreate all sorts of things that we think life should be like to make things comfortable for ourselves. But the Buddha land needs to be based in the Dharma. It needs to be based in the ideas of the Dharma, that there is, impermanence, there is dukkha, things are insubstantial. So that we have wisdom as well as compassion when we're helping each other to grow, that we take full responsibility for ourselves and the effect that we have on other people. So I gradually realized that Sangha, the spiritual community, this network of friendship, is a practice, just like Dharma study, like ritual, like meditation, that leads to growth. And actually, after some time, I was really inspired by the possible range, the ambition of the community in Sangharatchita's idea. So Sangharatchita founded the Triratna movement a long time ago now. And he had some really very amazing ideas of what a spiritual community can be. He describes how it can become the nucleus for a new society. So he said, we need to have an aspiration that a centre should serve a more noble, radical, even revolutionary function than simply giving people their spiritual vitamins to help them stagger along the path of worldliness for another few days. Just going to repeat that, I love that. A more radical, even revolutionary function than simply giving people their spiritual vitamins to help them stagger along on the path of worldliness for another few days. Any centre associated with the movement I founded is intended to be nothing less than the nucleus of a new society. He goes on to say, it is designed to allow people to develop as human beings. It will not try and do for people what they can only do for themselves, but it provides facilities, opportunities, and an environment of encouragement, as well as a social and spiritual context of human fellowship, which makes it easier for people to develop as human beings. So that is the Buddha land, providing facilities, opportunities, an environment of encouragement, which makes it easier for people to develop as human beings. And he describes how those human beings are individuals living in free association with one another, inspired by the principles of great compassion and transcendental wisdom, and above all by the bodhicitta, the will to enlightenment for all beings. And that these beings would be are part of the real, living, joyful spiritual fellowship of those practicing the teaching and following the way. So I think there's something I really resonate with that idea of a real, living, joyful spiritual fellowship of those who are practicing the teaching. And that to me is what, the centre is about. And although it might sound a bit remote, I do experience it here in Sheffield. I do experience it at order events. And a place where I think it's been particularly powerful actually is in India. So many people in Triratna are from India, and many of them are from what's called the Dalit group of people, which used to be called the untouchables. So they're people who in the caste system of India, which still, even though it's illegal, kind of exists in practice, people who are treated extraordinarily badly, you know, like not allowed to use the water of other people, have to throw themselves in a ditch if somebody from a higher caste is passing, a lot of violence towards people, rape towards people, like just very, very extreme, the awful conditions that people lived in. And through someone called Dr. Ambedkar, who converted to Buddhism, many hundreds of thousands, even millions of people from this community in India became Buddhists and started to practice the Dharma, started to live an ethical life, and through that have made real incredible improvements to their lives materially, you know, not just that they live a kind of better life educationally, but also when you go to India or when someone from India comes here, you can get a real sense of how much they practice. You know, people will get up at 4 or 5 in the morning to practice before they have a full day with their family and their work. They'll do stuff in the evening, and they are really having to practice against, just all the difficult and awful experiences that they have experienced themselves or their relatives in their life. So doing the Metta Bhavana for them is a life-saving practice, not just something we do to kind of improve our relationships with each other. So I think for me, at its best, what happens in India is a real example of how the nucleus of a new society in action. So, so the Sangha can be the nucleus of a new society, providing an alternative, radical vision of how people can relate to each other, because it is the vision of the bodhicitta, of a bodhisattva, a being who's dedicated to achieving enlightenment for all beings. But as we've heard in previous talks, to think, well, oh great, what a great thing, I'm going to become a bodhisattva, is really counterproductive. It leads to actually it just becoming a big ego project. You know, it's like, I'm going to be the best bodhisattva. So much more productive is to think of ourselves as being part of the bodhisattva, to think of ourselves as being part of Avalokiteshvara. We come together with this Chintamani at our heart. And so that's very inspiring for me. The idea, I think, you know, it really does happen here in Sheffield. We come together, we as Dharma practitioners, as friends, and we work together to create a spiritual community. And I guess, you know, that's my concern, is this bit of the Buddha land that's here in Sheffield. And I'm really proud of the lineage of Sheffield Buddhist Centre. We do have something very special. We have an atmosphere, I think, that's very special. And we're all part of creating that. So from the very first week that we come, like on a newcomer's course, whatever we do, whether we just enjoy working together, chatting together, being in study groups, coming along to Sangha Workstays, coming to Sangha Night, all of us are part of creating that Buddha land together. We can all take that responsibility to create that Buddha land. And how do we do that? Well, we've heard that through the talks over this series, so I'm not going to go into any great detail, but I'm just going to remind us that what the Buddha taught is the Four Sam Gravastus, which are the spirit of generosity, generosity of time, money, attention, friendship of ourselves, then kindly speech. So we appreciate each other, we create an atmosphere where we're hearing lovely things about people, that rejoicing in each other. Also action that's beneficial to other people. So we've got, I think I've run out on my thing, so we've got 4. We've got generosity, priyavadata, which is speech. We've got exemplification, so that's actually talking the talk, walking the walk, actually living that way. So there's quite a few talks that mention the Samgravastus, so you could go back and look at those. We also talked about how actually in terms of this myth of Avalokiteshvara, we all need to become the strongest hand of Avalokiteshvara that we can. And Dharma Mai gave a great talk where Dharma Mai talked about how we can practice the 6 perfections. So you can have a look at that. But, you know, we meditate, we study, we build friendships, but we also need to not just build the skills of the hand that's doing the work in the world, but we also need to develop and strengthen that connection with the Chintamani on the basis of the bodhicitta. So the enlightenment heart, this reorientation of ourselves. So we're no longer just all about what I can get for me and my family and friends, but we're changing the whole orientation to something much bigger, being part of something much bigger. And I just wanted to throw in a couple of things that I think for me are really helpful. So those of us who've done the dedication ceremony, which we say when we maybe start a retreat, or I did a few weeks ago when we dedicated this hall, the redecoration of the hall. One of the lines that I love is, "May our communication with one another be Sangha." And I love that because it makes Sangha a verb. So Sangha is not just us, it is in us, but that Sangha is in our communication with one another. That is where the Sangha happens. It is in the doing of it is. And I think that's really inspiring. So what we, to encourage ourselves to grow, we need to communicate as members of a spiritual community and relate to the highest potential in all of us, the highest of it all. We're all training to be Buddhas. We're all potential Buddhas, and let's support each other in that. I love it when I see people really seeing what's the highest in somebody and connecting with that. And I'm not sure that I do it particularly. I think I've got more of a kind of naturally critical mind, but it's a real aspiration for me to connect with what is highest in people. Because I know that when someone does that to me, I feel like a flower that blossoms. You know, it's a bit like that gives me permission to be that higher, kinder, warmer, wiser self. Yeah, so I think I shall come. I just want to mention one thing, which I kind of hinted at. So I love this building. I think it's fantastic. I love the gardens. I love the fact that for nearly next year, we'll celebrate 20 years in this building. And, you know, there's been so much work gone into making this building beautiful and the gardens beautiful. And it's really important because it means that when we come here, we're in a beautiful atmosphere. And I think for our practice for opening up into meditation, that's really important. However, if it became something that got in the way of us being a Buddha land, of us being a communicating Sangha, we'd sell it and we would meet in a garage. It is not the building that's the important thing. And you can get caught up in that. Do you know what I mean? You can start to think, oh my word, we have to pay the bills, we have to pay the heating. We must make sure, therefore, we run some really expensive classes and charge loads of money and very rich people can come or something like that. And just lose the whole sense of generosity and what we're about. So something about it's the connections between us that the building and the garden enables is the important things. They are not in themselves the Buddha land. The Buddha land is us together. Yeah. Okay, so to end, when I set out on my mission back when I was 15 or 16 or something, which was finding out what made people happy and then helping them to be happy, including myself, I do find that I feel like I've really found what I'm looking for, that analysis of how to find happiness. And in fact, I found so much more than I even knew that I could have when I set out. So this vision of building a Buddha land together in a community with my friends, with a shared vision of the highest human potential, the liberation of all sentient beings. I mean, really, what could be a better way to live? So that's why, for me, personally, I see jointly creating a Buddha land with other people who share the same values as me is the most important thing that I can be doing with my precious human life.